And the recording has started.
Okay, call the meeting to order of the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force for our remote retreat meeting, January 25th, 2022. Please call the roll.
Would you like me to read remote access and participation information?
Sure.
Okay. Remote access to information and participation. In accordance with Governor Newsom's Executive Order N3320, declaring a state of emergency regarding the COVID-19 outbreak, and Mayor London and Breed's proclamation declaring a local emergency issued on February 25, 2020, including the guidance for gatherings issued by the San Francisco Department of Public Health officer, aggressive directives were issued to reduce the spread of COVID-19. On March 17, 2020, the Board of Supervisors authorized their board and committee meetings to convene remotely via Microsoft Teams and will allow remote public comment via teleconference. Members of the public may participate by phone or may submit their comments by email to cheryl.leger@sfgov.org. That's CHERYL.LEGER@sfgov.org. All comments received will be made a part of the official record. Sunshine Ordinance Task Force agendas and their associated documents are available at sfbos.org/sunshine. As the COVID-19 disease progresses, please visit the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force website regularly to be updated on the current situation as it affects the legislative process. Do you want to read meeting decorum, Chair Wolf?
Yep. Yes. Meeting decorum. Any member of the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force may call for decorum due to disorderly conduct of meeting participants. Persons who engage in threatening and or menacing behavior may be asked to leave. Okay, now you can call the roll.
Item number 1, call to order, roll call, and agenda changes. Roll call. Member Schmidt.
Present.
Member Schmidt present. Member LaHood.
Present.
Member LaHood present. Member Padmanabhan.
Present.
Member Padmanabhan present. Member Wong.
Present.
Member Wong present. Member Stein.
Present.
Member Stein present. Vice Chair Yankee.
Present.
Vice Chair Yankee present. Member Highland.
Present.
Member Highland present. Member Neighbors.
Present.
Member Neighbors present. Chair Wolf.
Present.
Chair Wolf present. We have a quorum.
Okay, great. Going to make a few adjustments to the agenda. I'm going to move things around a little bit to facilitate things. Going to move item number 4, the review of Assembly Bill 361, move that to number 2, and then all the other items will move down one number. And then item number, what would become item number 10, which is emergency orders in effect and restrictions that are in place related to COVID emergency order. That'll be moved up to item number 7, below the presentation by Task Force Legal Advisor and Counsel. Are there any other changes or adjustments to the agenda?
Item number 7, it will be emergency orders in effect will become item number 7. Is that what you said, Chair?
Will become item number 7. Yes.
Okay. So
it'll be just above the task force meeting duration item.
Just before it. You just bear with me a moment. I think Victor's trying to get in touch with me.
I got them. Maybe I got the numbers. Not right here. Let's see, 2, 3.
So I heard from SOTF Clerk Young that he will be in and out of the meeting. Board of Supervisors is still going on. If urgent, I'd like me to text him. So the order of determination template may be something that he needs to present. Is that, how would you like me to respond, Chair Wolf?
The order of determination form is not on this agenda.
Okay.
That was something that I need to meet with him on before we put it on the agenda.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of work that needs to be done on it.
Okay. Okay, shall I read item number 1A?
Yes.
Item number 1A.
Oh, wait a second. We have to vote on the changes to the agenda items. Is there any other changes or adjustments to the agenda? If not, I'll move to make those adjustments. Is there a second?
Seconded. This is Member Wong.
Moved by the chair, second by Member Wong. Any further discussion? Any public comment? Last call for public comment. Okay, hearing none. Public comment is closed. Please call the roll.
Chair Wolf.
Aye.
Chair Wolf, aye. Member Wong.
Aye.
Member Wong, aye. Member Neighbors.
Aye.
Member Neighbors, aye. Member Highland.
Aye.
Member Highland, aye. Member Stein.
Aye.
Member Stein, aye. Member Padmanabhan.
Aye.
Member Padmanabhan, aye. Member LaHood.
Aye.
Member LaHood, aye. Member Schmidt.
Aye.
Member Schmidt, aye. Vice Chair Yankee.
Aye.
Vice Chair Yankee, aye. Moved by Chair Wolf, seconded by Member Wong to adjust the agenda as recommended.
Okay. Please call first item.
Item number 1A, findings to allow teleconference meetings under California Government Code Section 54953E. The task force is expected to consider a motion setting forth findings required under Assembly Bill 361 that would allow the committee to hold the meetings remotely according to the modified Brown Act teleconferencing set forth in AB 361.
Okay, any discussion on the matter? Is there a motion?
This is Vice Chair Yankee. I will move to approve the motion.
This is Member LaHood. I second.
Okay, moved by Vice Chair Yankee, seconded by Member LaHood. Any further discussion? Any public comment? Last call for public comment. Okay, hearing none, public comment is closed. Please call the roll.
Vice Chair Yankee.
Aye.
Vice Chair Yankee, aye. Member LaHood.
Aye.
Member LaHood, aye. Member Neighbors.
Aye.
Member Neighbors, aye. Member Highland.
Aye.
Member Highland, aye. Member Stein.
Aye.
Stein, aye. Member Wong.
Aye.
Member Wong, aye. Member Padmanabhan.
Aye.
Member Padmanabhan, aye. Member Schmidt.
Aye.
Member Schmidt, aye. Chair Wolf.
Aye.
Chair Wolf, aye. Moved by Vice Chair Yankee, seconded by Member LaHood to approve the motion allowing for teleconference meetings.
Very good. Okay, let's go to our next item. And that is the hearing review of Assembly Bill AB 361. If you can read that, please.
Yes. Next item, hearing, review of Assembly Bill AB 361 and related issues regarding open meetings of state and local agencies. Mr. David Pilpel invited to make a presentation.
Okay, great. Mr. Former Task Force Member Pilpel, are you ready?
I am.
Before we start, are we timing any of this stuff, Bruce?
I'm sorry?
Are we timing anybody's speaking?
So I put suggested times on the agenda. They're very conservative. I was trying to keep this meeting to no more than 2 hours. If we need to go over or have any extended time for any of the items, when we get to that mark, I'll chime in and ask how much more time we think we might need, just so we can keep track of time. So this one's allotted 10 minutes, and we'll see how it goes from there. All right, proceed, Mr.
Okay,
Pilpel.
you can hear me all right?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, and the record will reflect that the chair claims that he is being conservative. I heard that. I got that. So I just wanted to, that was a joke. I just wanted to explain my little one-page memo, maybe engage in a little dialogue with the members of the body, hear what the public has to say, and then it's up to the body whether you choose to send this document out, as I would suggest, amend it, or send it off to committee, whatever you choose to do with it. So after AB 361 passed in September, there was a pretty detailed explanatory memo from the city attorney's office on what it meant and what people needed to do, and largely as a result, policy bodies have been adopting the findings as you just did in item 1A, or some version of that, at least every 30 days in compliance with the new provisions under section 54953. It occurred to me that this might be an opportunity for the task force as a body to frankly improve its reputation with city departments, which I can assure you is generally not thought of very highly. We could talk about that or not, but that's my opinion based on conversations I have with various people. And I thought that rather than entangle with departments and policy bodies, perhaps it was an opportunity to elevate the dialogue and suggest some constructive ways that departments and policy bodies, including clerks and commission secretaries, could engage with the public in a better way in teleconferenced meetings, and to some extent just sort of going forward in how we hold meetings generally in the city. And so I put this together. You have it before you. It's at page 2 of the item 4 attachment. It took a few months and some back and forth to the members of the task force, I think, saw this a while back, but it's not surfaced publicly until now for members of the public to see it, and I thought that was important. I'm not going to read through it. I think we're all capable of doing that, but I was, fundamentally trying to, in a, direct and non-condescending tone, to suggest to these departments and policy bodies that kind of if they were on the other side experiencing meetings as a member of the public, which many of us have done or do on a daily or multiple times a day basis, they would understand what a frustration it is, whether you're calling like I am on the phone, staring off into space here, having to juggle multiple documents on a screen, trying to navigate through different platforms, whether it's, again, just by phone or Teams or WebEx or Zoom or Blue Jeans or whatever the fifth one is that I'm forgetting right now, and whether there are captions or not, or you're watching it on TV, or there's a delay, or trying to raise your hand with *3 or *5 or 10, or keeping track of the meeting ID. It's incredibly cumbersome and difficult for anyone who's even marginally sophisticated, and for anyone with less than those skills or any kind of challenge, physically or otherwise. Good luck. And at the same time, I happen to believe pretty strongly that public participation in public decisions is more important than ever. And I think you all believe that, which is why you're on this task force. And as someone who, although I haven't been to Iraq or Afghanistan, I did 3 tours of duty on this task force between 1996 and 2000, 2004 to 2008, and 2012 to 2016. So I've served 12 and a half years and dealt with the type of cases, and had a hand in Prop G in 1999, and kind of know the history of how the law is written, how it was intended, how it plays out in practical terms at policy bodies, all day, every day. So that was kind of the background and the intent. I hope I've kept this pretty brief, but happy to engage in some dialogue if that's useful. Chair Wolf, thanks.
Thank you. Members, any thoughts on this? So one thought I had that kind of what Mr. Pelpel brings forward for me, that's also been somewhat difficult for us, is not having a standard web conferencing platform for every meeting. So that means each member of the public has to learn the different features and functions for each different brand of web conferencing software, which makes things even more cumbersome, makes it more difficult for people with disabilities, and also and also dealing with tech support. So yeah, I would think that having the city finally, after all this time, just implement a single platform for all web conferencing to make standard and familiar the features and the controls and the tech support. I think something like that could be in order. I think the points about making the announcements that is mentioned here is, I don't think that would take up that much additional time. I think it's a great idea to announce, is like for our meetings, it's all audio for the public, to make announcements of, what we're doing every so often. Here it's mentioned every 30 minutes. I think that that's satisfactory. Other thoughts? Mr. Pelpel, was it your suggestion that maybe this be some sort of system-wide development of some system-wide advisory?
Well, my couple of things. My intention was that this could be dressed up as a memo, not really a letter, but more of a memo from the task force with your approval, addressed, as I indicated, to all department heads, board and commission clerks and secretaries, and policy body members, maybe with copied each department head. Oh, I'm sorry, it's addressed to department heads, excuse me. So, you know, I don't typically use the term system-wide advisory, but it would certainly be, in my view, within the task force's authority under 67.30, I forget now if it was C or E, to advise departments on implementation of the ordinance, and by extension, the Brown Act, which is incorporated. So that's how I saw proceeding, but you know, certainly you've got discretion as to how to go about it. This item is listed as a discussion and action item, so in my view, you could take action on it tonight, or choose not to. You've got options. On the question of a consistent platform, I would just suggest that that's a beautiful dream, but I think that's unlikely. Departments either have agreements or practices or reasons to do things the way they do them. I mean, I don't think you're going to convince the Board of Supervisors to use a different platform than what they're using, and nor do I think that other departments or policy bodies are going to choose to operate differently simply because the task force, you know, likes one approach over another. I think what's more possible, I don't know if likely is the word, but what's more possible is to get into some detail, perhaps not in this document, but another document about functionality. And so whether they're on WebEx, Zoom, or Teams or whatever, that at a minimum, you know, each person should be identified, and the way to raise your hand, and, you know, certain things about decorum or etiquette or practice should be spelled out on the agenda, in some cases read by the clerk, in other cases maybe read for each item, in some cases not read for each item. You know, it's more of standardizing expectations rather than standardizing the platform. If you haven't been to a number of different meetings of various agencies over the years, and in particular over the last 2 years, you will find that the way boards and commissions operate varies considerably. The way advisory bodies operate, again, varies greatly. And even the same kind of item, I used an example earlier with a city department person a couple hours ago on a phone call, that just building a miscellaneous $10 million building or renovating a restroom in a city building, if you were doing that at PUC, MTA, Rec Park, police station or police department, the port, or fire department, or some other department, the way that's calendared at each of those oversight bodies would be substantially different. The way they take public comment, the way staff presents, whether there's a motion beforehand, you know, all of the ways that those interactions happen vary considerably across the board. I don't expect to fix all of that ever. I don't expect the task force to fix all of that. I think moving toward some more standard and understood expectations, at least for the public, would be a huge improvement in public participation at meetings.
Okay.
Let me stop there for the moment.
Okay. Members, any thoughts? If not, I think we can open it up for public comment. Okay, Member LaHood, Vice Chair Yankee.
Oh, thanks.
Saw hands go up. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think this looks really good, and I want to thank Mr. Pilpel for presenting this. And I think, you know, something very close to this going out, I think, would be beneficial, because I think there's really a lot of good suggestions in here to help standardize things. And you know, I think a lot of great points have been raised. if we do send this out or some version thereof, my only suggestion would be, in numerous instances, it says that, some like a policy body should do this, or meetings should do, when meeting without video, something should be done. I'm not sure we should be saying should, because that seems to imply that it's part of the assembly bill or part of the sunshine ordinance. I think instead of saying should, say suggested or recommended or something along those lines, just so it's clear that we're saying best practices and not that we're trying to call out or invent new violations or something. That's all. That was all my comment was.
How about we urge?
Urge would be, yeah. I think urge would be great. Yeah.
Something like that. Okay, let's open up for Member LaHood. I saw your hand flip up.
No, I think
Okay.
it was somebody else. It was not me.
Okay, let's open up for public comment. And we're not going to necessarily, during retreats in the past, we've kind of kept things a little freer flowing, and and we don't have a lot of members of the public here. I think we can just kind of folks self-facilitate, would be appreciative. That way we can have a kind of a modicum of a discussion here about these some of these items.
Chair Wolf, will we be
Yes.
timing members of the public on their public comments?
No, what I'm saying is that I'm asking folks to self-facilitate, but just so we can have a kind of a more of a discussion about some of these more arcane items. So that's what I'm asking for, since we have so few members of the public here. All right, hearing none. Okay, members, is there a motion? Do you want to make a suggestion? We do have a meeting coming up very soon next week. Can certainly, before the agenda goes out, if we want to work on a draft and have it approved at that meeting, we can do that. If you so choose to want to send out a system-wide memo or advisory. Okay, not hearing much chatter on this. I'll tell you what I'll suggest is I'll take what Mr. Pilpel presented. I'll maybe grab one of you folks and maybe also work with Mr. Pilpel to draft up something for the February meeting, and we'll see what people think about it then. If there doesn't seem to be any action then okay. But I think this is it's a good idea to start for the task force to start chiming in on some of these issues, as it's a moving target. Okay, so how about a motion to continue this item to the February meeting?
This is Member LaHood. I'll make a motion to continue this item to the February meeting because I think there were a lot of good suggestions made that could be worked out with you and someone else between now and the next meeting, so that we could proceed at that time.
Okay, motion by Member LaHood. Is there a second?
And this is Member Padmanabhan, that I'd like to second that motion.
So moved by Member LaHood, second by Member Padmanabhan. Is there any further comment, members? Is there any?
David Pilpel, could I just
Yeah.
make one or two more sentences?
Sure.
So I appreciate the discussion, and thank you again for listening. I do have a sentence in here, the last sentence of the first big paragraph. Here we add our guidance, da-da-da-da. So that was intended to convey the idea that where in the rest of the document it reads should, that it's conveying the sense of the task force of kind of advising as to practical ways to implement. That could be worded differently, And if that was Member Yankee's suggestion, I take that. But it was really, trying to convey that sense that the task force really believes that these are ideas that would help. Again, different ways to word it, and I will leave that to you. I believe Clerk Leger has this both as a PDF and in Word. So there's that. Okay, thanks again for listening.
Sure. Context noted, and we'll try to find some language to convey that if the word should seems to be not acceptable. Any other public comment? Are we ready for a vote? Okay, please call the roll.
Member LaHood?
Aye.
Member LaHood, aye. Member Padmanabhan?
Aye.
Member Padmanabhan, aye. Member Neighbors?
Aye.
Member Neighbors, aye. Member Highland?
Aye.
Member Highland, aye. Member Stein?
Aye.
Member Stein, aye. Member Wong?
Aye.
Member Wong, aye. Member Schmidt?
Aye.
Member Schmidt, aye. Vice Chair Yankee?
Aye.
Vice Chair Yankee, aye. Chair Wolf?
Aye.
Chair Wolf, aye. Moved by Member LaHood, seconded by Member Padmanabhan to continue the item to the February meeting.
Very good. Thank you. Please call the, let's see here. Yeah, please call the next item.
That would be public comment.
Public comment.
Yep. Item number 2, general public comment. Members of the public may address the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force on matters that are within the task force jurisdiction, but not on today's agenda.
Do we have any general public comment?
Sullivan.
Do we have other public commenters? Chair Wolf, it looks like we only have one public commenter. Shall I give him 3 minutes to speak?
Yes, yes, indeed.
Mr. Sullivan, are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
Combining complaints. Task Force Procedure 10, and I'm not going to read all of it. The complaint committee or other committee authorized to process complaints shall review and determine whether or not to combine complaints for a single hearing prior to scheduling before the task force. One of the criteria, issues or violations must be within 90 days of submission of the initial complaint. To me, the issue of combining a complaint is squarely in the task force responsibility and not the petitioner's or the task force administrator. It is confusing when presenting a complaint and following procedures, and task force members seem to confused as to why I did not combine the complaint. I can't. And the issue of violation must be within 90 days uses the word must. But these are your own procedures. Mr. Steinberg is throwing all sorts of obstructions at me, including misuse of Evidence Code 1040B2, misuse of rule of reason, over-redacting beyond the law, and using the redacting itself as a claim for slowing his output. False claims of large amounts of responsive records. I have received 95 bar or medical or other such commercial ads, a bunch of logos, and all other non-responsive records, basically trying to hide any needles in a haystack of junk, and stopping notification or links to public record releases, even though my request was by email. The burden of proof is on him to show that he is releasing responsive records and following the law. The original order was for violating and not producing records back in May 2021. Now, I'm not sure how all of these other violations and obstructions he has come up with, fit within your procedures as written. Luckily, the procedures have both a combining and severance clause. I will give you the additional evidence of violations and obstructions. It'll be up to you to decide how to handle them procedurally. Thank you for your time.
Do we have other public commenters?
Last call for public comment. Okay, hearing no other further public comment. Public comment is closed. Before we go to the next item, no, never mind. Please call the next item.
Item number 3, review of administrator's authority to determine if complaints are valid pursuant to complaint procedures.
Okay, so I wanted to put this on the agenda to make sure that everybody, we're all on the same page. Everybody has an understanding of the authority that the task force has given the administrator for over a long period of time with much review that will also possibly help us all understand and to help facilitate the process. There's no need to take up, in certain cases, there's no need to take up an issue when it's clearly the administrator has some authority to act. And so items could be dealt with at an administrative level versus at coming through the hearing process. So I just wanted to go through our complaint procedure and each of the points that I have pointed out. They're not that long. I can just read them because I noticed that it's that the complaint procedure is not attached to the agenda. So starting with, and then we'll have a discussion if there's anything that we may think that need to be changed or adjusted or something, we can have that conversation also. I think with all the other processes, procedures that we've made adjustments to, I think this is also another area that need to be focused on. So A, in section A, where is it here? A1, the administrator shall discuss. So it's the goal of the task force to help the public gain access to public records and meetings. The staff of the task force will therefore work with members of the public to help achieve such access in order to avoid the need of filing complaints with the task force. Number 1, the administrator shall discuss the request with the member of the public and attempt to mediate the request. This has been a long-standing task. I know each of the administrators that we've had over the years do very good diligence to try and help people when they call or contact the office to try and facilitate, and at times will also intervene, and that frequently does help the process and the public get their records. B2, with regards to what's included with the complaint, the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force Administrator shall review incoming complaints prior to acceptance and to ensure that the following criteria are met at a minimum. And there's a bunch of bullet items, and through some of the additional processes that we have been implementing are also part of that list. So it's just a command by the administrator to review the incoming complaints and prior to acceptance of it, so that it could be suggested for a hearing to assure that the file is complete. C3, the administrator shall advise the complainant and the affected department agency of the date, time, and location of the committee and or full task force meetings at which the complaint will be discussed. The administrator shall inform both parties of the deadline to submit any supporting documentation. Both parties shall be held to the stated deadline 5 working days before the hearing. So we already implement this. It's pretty self-explanatory. C9, administrator's authority to table or close files. At the discretion of the task force administrator, complaint hearings may be delayed or scheduled before the task force for hearing to consider tabling the matter if the complainant is unresponsive to communication attempts. After 6 months have elapsed and at the discretion of the administrator may inform the complainant that the complaint files will be closed unless they provide confirmation of intent to attend a hearing on a specific date. Okay, I believe that that's also being implemented and tracked. E, department to comply with determination of the task force. In 1, the administrator shall send the order of determination to the complainant and the respondent, and as necessary, request a written response, which shall be monitored by the Task Force Compliance and Amendments Committee or any committee recommended by the chair. Okay. The next one, that was EF, documentation and information regarding individual complaints. The administrator shall keep a file of all documents and a log of all petitions filed with the task force, including the dates of each petition, the department agency against which it was made, the nature of the complaint, and its status. This shall be in compliance with its records and retention schedule. I believe that's already done. We get to see that in the administrator's report. G2, correspondence, new complaint filings, general communications to the task force, and communications in which the task force was copied will be logged and listed in the administrator's report for review at the regularly scheduled meeting of the task force. I believe that's pretty self-explanatory. It's already being well done and has been for many years. And G3, if so requested and at the discretion of the chair of the task force and or his or her designee, communications not related to an open complaint will be included in the administrator's report for the task force's review and or forwarded to the members of the task force. This is already very active. And those are all the items where the word administrator pretty much exists in our complaint procedure. Just want to make sure everybody hears it. We're all in the same room. And just wondering if there's is there any discussion or any about it or issues? Okay, hearing none. Is there any members of the public that wish to chime in on this?
David Pilpel.
Okay, go ahead. We're not going to time it. Go ahead.
That's fine. Just to clarify, so were you suggesting any changes, or were you just reconfirming the powers and duties of the administrator under the existing complaint procedures?
I'm just reconfirming it, just by saying it out loud and identifying it while we're all in the room. We don't really have a chance to kind of sit together and read through some of the governing documents. And I sometimes get a sense that there are some procedures that should not be going to committee. They could actually just stay with the administrator and have the administrator who has the authority to be able to perform those functions. So Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And if folks felt that there needed to be something tweaked or optimized, more authority, less authority, or something like that, here's the opportunity to have that discussion.
Okay, so to that end, you might want to ask Cheryl or Victor if there are any practical issues with making any of that stuff happen, or if they suggest that something is currently more workable or less workable, and if the language kind of works for them on a day-to-day basis. But that's just my thought or suggestion. Thanks.
Yeah, they're part of this meeting. They're free to chime in as they like.
I just want to point out that, frequently when I get people saying that they're looking for records, I can often point them to the correct custodian at the department where they're trying to get their information. And there have been times when somebody has said, well, I'm not getting, records that I'm looking for, and I can call that custodian and say, are you aware of this request? And so is looking for a particular record, and they'll say either, yes, that's been provided, or no, it hasn't. But I do often try to work it out with people so that if it's something simple enough that doesn't require hours and hours of time.
Okay. Are there any areas where you felt that you should, like, it would be easier or more facilitating if you were to have a different or more authority or latitude?
This is Victor. This is regarding when we receive complaints and they do not provide supporting documentation, such as the original request for records. In those cases, we do put them off. I just want to get clarification. Do you want us as the administrators to go ahead and close those if they don't get them to us within 6 months? Or do you want us to forward it to the task force for the task force to close?
I think for that one, hold on, that was the C3. I would say, yeah, go ahead. Who's speaking?
Oh, Member Highland here. Just
Go
from
ahead.
past experience, and I know we've
Here.
kind of talked about this and had public comment on this years ago. I think maybe the administrators should send us a list of 3, 4, say these have all been X, Y, Z, and let us close it. But I think something that we've heard before that maybe drops out of compliance for, not showing up or something, they would have the authority to do that. So I think we should make the first determination.
Yeah, I think the intent of the language is that it would come to the task force, but it's more of so it basically says after 6 months have elapsed and at the discretion of the administrator may inform the complainant that the complaint files will be closed unless they provide confirmation of intent to attend a hearing. So the question here is, will it just expire, like go stale and then close, or is it meant for it to come to the task force to have it officially closed?
Just to add to that, I don't consider those complaints to be valid yet because they haven't provided the required documentation.
Got it. So they're
That's
not
part
even
of it.
complete. Are you saying that there's no file number attached? You don't
We
assign
always
a
assign
file
a
number?
file number upon receipt. We always assign a file number just for tracking purposes.
Okay.
But if they don't give us, like, the original request for records, we consider the complaint to be incomplete because we don't know what they actually requested. And in those cases, we make several requests for that document. And if they don't get it, we consider closing it. And that's a slightly different situation, that it's an incomplete complaint file.
Okay, there is an additional condition here that in the same paragraph that states the complainant will be notified of the intent to table or close complaint files and the matter will be scheduled before the task force for consideration of tabling or closing the complaint due to inactivity. So there is some specificity on that. If you feel that it's easier not to have that extra process and give the authority to the administrator, I don't know. I think there should be at least an opportunity for, I mean, they could refile, that kind of thing. Let's hear from Member Schmidt, and then I want to put that before Member Highland again.
Yeah, my concern here is placing obstacles in the path of a complainant. I'm not sure if we, someone who complains, if we require a whole bunch of things from them, and this includes requiring them to go to hearings. These are rules that are SOTF self-imposed. Now, and so I'm not sure if this is the forum to address something sort of more fundamental, like, do we hear their case without them, et cetera, et cetera. I understand that people will file a complaint and they disappear, and that's probably something that should be sort of ferreted out of the process, people who just give up on their complaint. But I do have a concern with the complainant who makes a complaint, but then they're told, well, you have to satisfy all these other requirements that we've decided to put on you. So that is a personal concern of mine, and I just wanted to put it out there. I don't necessarily want to make any changes today.
Okay, just for clarification, this particular section is before it's even scheduled. So it's a matter of the complaint form comes in, the administrator says, you didn't send me any information. They're not responding to any communications. So now that complaint is going stale. How, should the administrator have the ability to close the file, or should, because it was submitted and part of the process as it's written now, come to the task force to have it officially closed? And that's the question. I'm not making a decision or a suggestion. I'm just stating the fact.
Yeah, in terms of, losing contact with someone, they don't respond to calls, they don't respond to emails, they just disappear. I think the administration should be, keeping those cases off our schedule. And they should be shut down with, efficiency. So if that's all this is about, no problem. I'm more thinking about somebody who they keep in contact. I hope that's not who we're talking about here.
Yeah. Okay, great. I just wanted to put that based to Member Highland before we get to Member Stein, just based upon your experience in history too, and your statement that you think it should come to the task force. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me, along Member Schmidt's thoughts and concerns, here's the other side of the coin. If someone presents a cogent and valid complaint and says, here's my complaint against XYZ department, I will not be able to, I'm not able to make further communications. I will not be at the initial intake hearings. Please run with it. I think we should be able to move forward with that, because to give the other members some history, we came up with this change of policy because we had several people that filed many complaints and then would disappear out of the country, out of the state. We'd have no communications, and we had to deal with our backlog. And that was, I think, Bruce, where that, this tweak in our policy came. But if you go to the original reading of the Sunshine Charter, what we're supposed to be doing, and we've had a couple of cases recently that have touched on this, they should be able to present it and then step away, and we execute that complaint. So that's why I think it's okay for administrators to say, okay, we have 5 cases here. This is the communication log. They've dropped off, and we can look at them. And if any of them merit us taking them on as they are, we have that option. And I think we should make the final determination as to whether they're tabled or not. That's just my position on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Stein.
Yeah, I'll just say I agree with that as well. Although I understand that what we're talking about right now is just what the administrator's duties are or powers are under our complaint process. And I just wanted to mention that, Bruce, the version you read is not our current version because we actually agreed to some tweaks to that version in the proposal that I put forward. And I just want to say I didn't change anything really substantive, but I tried to bring out a little bit more clear way what the process was. And I do remember that I renamed sort of that A and B as kind of a step 1. A is like a step 1, contact SOTF about resolving your request. And then it just focuses on, the administrator will try to mediate, try to help you answer it and so on. And if you can't resolve it, then you could file a complaint. And then B gets relabeled step 2, file a complaint with SOTF, and kind of goes through all the things that you mentioned. But I tried to make it clear that the administrator has this initial role of trying to resolve the complaint and that it doesn't necessarily, have to evolve into a formal complaint.
Okay, then one thing that needs to happen, I guess part of this, just administratively, I pulled the version I have off our website.
Right. These changes have not been made, and I've actually, I actually have gone through and done I tried to put it into a very logical, clear way of what exactly needs to change, which I assume somebody in IT has to do. I don't know who actually makes those changes on the website, and I can forward this to Cheryl. I don't think I've already forwarded this piece of the proposal to Cheryl, but I can forward it to her tomorrow.
Yeah,
to forward to an IT person.
Yeah, it's not a web page. It's actually just a PDF. So
right. So I've made the changes to the PDF in a final document, so I can submit that, and that can be sent to IT.
Okay, great. Then let's do that so that everybody's looking at the same thing. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. All right. So the issue on that item, though, as Member Highland brought up, was should there just be a running log, and maybe during the task force meetings when we get to the administrator's report, or it be pulled out of the administrator's report as a separate item. Maybe the first item of business is to close stale files and make it part of the record. What do you think about that? I'm seeing some nods. Vice Chair Yankee.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to potentially include it in the administrator's report so it's out there and documented. I'm not sure I want to see it as a separate agenda item because our meetings are already so long, and I don't want to see more, but things that clutter up an agenda when it's just a routine matter that's already within the purview of the administrator. So I think notification of us is great, but I don't really see a need to make it its own separate agenda item with a separate vote.
Okay, so wait until the end of the meeting till we get to the administrator's report.
I mean, that's my personal opinion. I think it's fine to touch on that as part of the administrator's report item, and have Cheryl briefly talk about that. But
so let's ask Cheryl and Victor, how often does this happen?
I think in the last 6 months, we actually have 5 cases where we haven't heard for 4 or 5 months from some people that their matters should be closed, or we have not received the initial request. We've had initial request issues with, for example, Mr. Kramer, who has student interns in his office that were making requests but not following through. And so, that kind of thing. And I have spoken with Mr. Kramer and given him a list of cases that, and he was pretty responsive. He said, yeah, we can close those because we didn't get information. Those are interns that have left our office, and we're not working with them now.
I would actually, this is Victor. I would actually estimate that number a little bit higher in the 10 to 15 range, in where we have not received responses for additional documents that we do need to proceed.
Okay, so do you have any, maybe what's important is if you are keeping track of this in the office, that make sure that either me or whoever the next chair is moving forward, that they know that there needs to be action taken on those items.
Okay.
Because the administrator's report has so much in it, if there needs to be some specific action taken. Okay, we have a public member anonymous who wants to chime in. Go ahead.
That may be Mr. Pilpel.
Oh, okay. It comes up as anonymous. So.
All right. Yeah. We're different people. We're not the same. So I guess my thought here is that you've got at least 2 choices. One is to require that any case that's closed administratively or proposed to be up for final action to do that by the task force. The other alternative that I can think of is to delegate that power to the administrator, but perhaps require a report back as part of the administrator's monthly report that under that delegated authority, no cases were closed this month, or one case was closed because of da-da-da, and perhaps also require that in exercising that power that the administrator consult with the chair prior to taking final action to close the case administratively. But maybe the happy medium is to include that upfront in the administrator's report with a very bold motion that says, okay, we've got no cases this month, or we have 1 or 2 cases that we're proposing to close administratively. The appropriate motion is to authorize the administrator to close those cases, file number 1, 2, 3, 4, due to non-responsiveness on the part of the complainant, blah, 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 and to, really put that on page 1 of the administrator's report. So even if that is your last item at 10 o'clock, hopefully earlier, that it would be very clear what action the task force is ultimately taking to dispose of a complaint like that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, there you go. Thanks.
Okay. Any other comment or discussion on this item? Okay, I don't think there's any action needed. I think the clarification is duly noted, and we'll monitor it and see how it goes. All right. Hearing no other discussion, let's move on to the next, and no action, let's move on to the next item.
Item number 5, hearing, presentation by the Task Force Legal Advisor Council, DCA Helen Castillo and DCA Mark Price Wolf. Section A, review of attorney-client privilege. Section B, new law, codes, and regulations that affect the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force and the Task Force.
Hey, I'll hand the mic over to you.
Hey everyone, I'll start out. Mark Price Wolf, good to see you. I'll try to keep it relatively brief, but be very open to any questions you might have. I'm going to talk a little bit about just generally what the law of attorney-client privilege is and how that might be helpful going forward in your business with the task force. But I'm really open to any questions you might have. When we were coming up with topics to discuss at a brief meeting with Bruce and with Matt to talk through what might be helpful. So this is one of the topics we came up with. So broad strokes, what's attorney-client privilege? What's our role, Helen and myself, with you? And when is the information that we're giving you, when is that privileged and when isn't it? And the truth is, as you have seen in your time on this task force, it's not always an easy call or easy thing to do. It might be easy to define, but not easiest to play out in every scenario. So I think it's important to appreciate that it's not always an easy call. And as an attorney, I want to be mindful of that and to respect the first kind of rule is the ultimate rule that you as the body is the ultimate holder of that privilege. So I'd rather err on the side of giving you the privilege and you waiving it than saying something that was meant to be confidential and covered by the privilege and inadvertently saying something that was intended to be covered by the privilege. So quite simply, the attorney-client privilege is non-public advice that the city attorney provides to city officials acting in their official capacities, and it's confidential and privileged. And one thing I note is that I gave to the task force, put together like a 5-page document of case law and legal definitions around attorney-client privilege, attorney work product, and waiving that privilege. It's attached to the agenda. I'm happy to answer any questions off that or later that might come up there. And those have really great citations to current and valid case law. It's from, most of it is from the most recent iteration of the Good Government Guide. So tried to pull out more than just single 1 or 2 lines to give you a little bit of context, the things that I put in there, but I also included page references there. So these are all publicly available documents that I included in this memo. So, I mean, the real trick is, well, gosh, Mark, Helen, how do we know what's public and what's not supposed to be public? And I think that's where a lot of the discussions have come down to, where the task force says, well, maybe we want certain types of information public. And if that's the case, that's fine, maybe. But that's something that the task force has to decide collectively as a body, and no single member can just say, oh, that shouldn't be protected. I'm going to post that I'm going to go tweet that, or I'm going to go mention that publicly at the next meeting. So that sort of brings me to the next point, is who holds the privilege? Well, it's the entire body. And it's an interesting notion that what you guys vote on as a body with respect to a particular document is binding on a future composition. So if one person leaves on the task force and there's a new member, you don't have to re-vote to waive the privilege and so on and so forth. So that's something to keep in mind. A later body can vote to waive something that an earlier body wanted to keep privilege under the attorney-client privilege. So there's some nuances there. The other big point that I wanted to make is something called attorney work product privilege. It's very similar to the attorney-client privilege, but it's any type of work or any documentation that reveals an attorney's impressions, conclusions, work, legal research or theories, anything like that is going to be protected under this separate doctrine called the work product privilege. So if Helen or I were to write a memo where we wanted to summarize all the case law about a particular issue, even if we just did that for our own benefit, you didn't ask that, and you'd say, well, I didn't ask for advice on that. Why is that covered? Well, those are our thoughts, and those are protected by the privilege, by what's called the work product privilege, and that's actually held by the attorney. So only the attorney can waive that privilege. Slightly different. Probably won't come up that much in what we do, but it's important just to know that it exists, and it extends to people that work with us. Like if I have a paralegal work on something, and that paralegal work is also covered by that same doctrine. There were some other issues that came up in casual conversation when we were talking through this privilege, through the training that I just wanted to touch on and have people chime in on. And one of them was this tension about, well, isn't attorney-client privilege only come up when the task force is in threat of litigation or threat of risk of doing something that might lead to litigation? Isn't that when attorney-client privilege kicks in, not just when we're talking to you about legal issues? And I think that distinction has a very certain amount of surface appeal to it, because you usually think of needing an attorney when liability might arise. So that's when the privilege should apply. But actually, it's broader than that. It's not just when the board might potentially be in a sticky situation. It really is broader. It's anytime there's this confidential advice that's not supposed to be for the public, that an attorney is conveying to the client. So I know that there is a very strong culture, which is of the task force, which is extraordinarily commendable, to be open and prides itself on pushing the rest of the government to be open. But I do think it's also important that there might be circumstances when you want to exercise that privilege, and just want you to know that you have that power, I would say, to do so. And I'm here to help you understand that and give you, or Helen and I, to give you the advice that you need in as candid a way as possible. I think really that's what the privilege is there to protect, is so that we can always be candid with each other. I want to open it up to any particular questions that folks might have about the privilege or attorney-client, or work product doctrine. Or else I see Dean has a question, or else I can just, I want to be mindful that Helen is going to talk about a slightly different topic too, but certainly.
So I have a question. When you talked about attorney work, this is Member Stein, when you talked about attorney work product privilege, you said anything that reveals an attorney's opinion. And to me, does that mean anything that's written in a memo? Because you're analyzing legal questions, so and it's your analysis, or your understanding of how to parse, legal issues that exist. So is that automatically your opinion?
I think the general answer to that is yes. Yeah, when a lawyer
is writing.
So then
are you saying every memo that you give us, you also have to waive the confidentiality, since every memo is an attorney work product privilege memo?
No, I was speaking generally, like when we're writing memos, like that include legal analysis. I think I could assert, say, hey, this is work product. We shouldn't turn that over to the public. But a lot of times the memos or emails that we're writing back and forth might not really be in any way, substantive legal advice or something that would be important to assert the privilege. But for instance, if I'm litigating a case where I'm writing a memo about the types of documents that I want to seek from the other side, and I'm writing about all the important legal issues in the case, and I'm saying, oh, we really need to make sure we get memos about their computer programming and just notes to myself, those sorts of things. Like, that's my work product. I'm thinking through how I want to litigate the case.
Yeah, I'm still confused about, it seems like you could say that any memo we get is a work product privileged memo.
Wouldn't you say that like any preparation or research leading up to a communication with us might be the work product versus the communication itself being covered under attorney-client privilege?
I think a lot of it could be still. So if there was a public records request for all my background research on a memo that I wrote. I could say, like, I could withhold it based on the basis that's my work product. But I think what Member Stein is getting at is, like, is everything I ever write, could that be work product? Is that sort of, you're wondering how broad it gets?
Yes, exactly. And how to know when it's not work product.
I mean, I'd love to be able to draw a line and say, this is exactly where you're stepping over and this is where you're stepping under it. But I think, like, anytime, anytime it's really revealing, like, legal analysis, legal thought, then it's going to be, or strategy, then it's going to be protected under the doctrine. So it is actually quite broad.
Let's go to, we have some other hands. So Member Schmidt, then Member LaHood.
You're
Mute.
Sorry, my first penalty for the night. I'm sure I'm not done. Mark, just wanted to sort of ask you a couple of foundational questions, because maybe these will be a little bit elucidating. First is, you had mentioned how the task force is the holder of the privilege with regards to communications from you to the task force. But let's just, I just want to clarify that the client is still the city, right?
So it's a simple, straightforward question that, like, doesn't necessarily have a simple, straightforward answer, right? Okay. So I think, yes, ultimately the client is the city, but obviously we are the attorneys for the task force. So, and to some extent, when individually, when you come to us with legal questions, we might be your attorney as a member of the task force, right? So it's wearing different hats at different times. And I think what's challenging in this role is because sometimes, actually, I would say quite often, the role is that you guys are adjudicating a dispute between a private individual and the city, right? So, who is our client, I think, is really what you're getting at, right, Member Schmidt? And it's complicated. I see that. And that's why it's really important that we have what we call a due process wall within the city attorney's office, where Helen and I kind of live in one lonely side of the wall and the rest of the office pretty much is on the other side, where when it comes to any issues before the task force with a pending complaint, we are your counsel, where we don't go, knocking on the doors of the attorney who advises such and such an agency and be like, can we just powwow about this? Even if it would be so much easier to. So we really take strict adherence to that due process wall.
Yeah, and that due process wall is where I wanted to go next. Sure. Thank you for leading me there. Tell me how the due process wall, and I know it's in the ordinance, how does that affect, how does that cause you to represent to provide advice, to provide representation? How does it cause you to do that differently than if there wasn't a wall? If you could think of, it may be a hard question because I don't know, exactly. I'm sort of like wondering what effect it has.
I'll give you a good example. Well, oftentimes in these disputes, we hear an agency come and say, I spoke to my DCA who advises me, and they said that I can withhold documents A through F under this exemption, right? And so, and then member on the task force will turn to Helen and I and say, is that valid, right? Or like, what does that exemption mean? Or did they properly withhold? Now, the easy thing for me to do would be to go talk to Susie Q, attorney, who gave that advice and say, hey, can we talk through why you gave that advice? Can I look at the documents too and see if I agree with you? The task force has these really good questions. They're just concerned that maybe it was applied too broadly, trying to get at the core of whether the public should get these documents. I think that's a good example of why that would be an easy way to try to get at what you guys are interested in, right? But we can't do that.
It's a great example. Yeah, it's a great example. And can you imagine a scenario where there's someone in the city attorney's office who does provide that kind of advice, and then we could talk to you, and the advice would differ on an issue? Can you imagine that happening?
Yeah, I mean, that in a way, I wouldn't say that's ideal, but that would be how the due process wall is working.
Okay.
Right? Is if you do get. Actually, I don't want to say that because my advice might be the same doesn't mean due process wall isn't working. But I could certainly imagine that scenario happening.
Okay. My last question to you right now is, when the city attorney's office issues a legal memorandum, citywide memorandum, do you feel that you need to sort of advise us in compliance with what that general citywide guidance is that's coming from the other side of the wall? Or do you feel like there could be an instance where you tell us, I actually think it's different?
So that brings up an interesting issue because, if there's just certain pronouncements by the city attorney's office on issues that might not be pending before the task force at the moment, like I wouldn't think the due process wall or forbids me from talking to those people about those issues, right? I think it only really comes up on current pending issues before the task force. It's a little different than what you're asking. I'm getting to what you're asking. I think that generally I have a very healthy, I think I speak for Ellen too, very healthy respect for when the office puts out a memo, knowing how much time and energy and thought goes into that. So it's usually incredibly well thought out and have been vetted a lot. Decisions aren't made lightly. All that's to say, if there are other things that I can't think of a good factual hypothetical right now, where if the task force thinks that there would need to be some sort of independent analysis, or I think recently we got an email from a task force member asking hey, do you agree with this memo's take on something? And it was a memo put out by the city attorney's office. I think it's a valid question to ask, and we're happy to look into it, on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time. I thought this was a good opportunity to just sort of get into those issues, partly for me and also partly for other members. I'm done.
And I also want to encourage, if anybody just offline wants to have a one-off phone call, happy to talk through, because they're challenging. One other point that I did want to make before moving on that this comes up not too infrequently. Oh, Lila, I see you. Sorry. Is that the municipal codes in municipalities cannot, even though there might have passed laws or have tried to abridge the attorney-client privilege, those are not valid. So in other words, there might be portions of the Sunshine Ordinance that says, so-and-so has to disclose everything. And then we hear from a complainant hey, you can't assert attorney-client privilege because of such and such a provision says you have to disclose everything. I think it's important. This comes up every couple months with the task force that the attorney-client privilege is in the county, city and county charter, and that trumps any municipal code. And that's what that St. Croix decision is all about. We talked to every school. That was the third point I wanted to make. Member LaHood, did you have a question?
Yes. This is very interesting, and from CAC we've asked you questions coming from a different direction. One thing that there seems to be a conundrum here, which is we come to you two for advice, that we want to use in public hearings. So anything we're asking you, we want to discuss in public. And it seems that if it's covered by attorney-client privilege, should we, I don't, I'm a journalist, and I believe in, attribution. Like, where did you get this information from? What are your sources? And, who are your sources and are they credible? I could just walk in and act as if I had come up with all of this on my own. But I think there's actually more credence to what I say if I say, I talked to our attorneys and they said, because you have specialized knowledge. Are you saying that if we talk to you or you write a memo for us, that I should not say that and I should just act as if I came to these conclusions on my
own? That's a great question, and it sort of doesn't have a clear answer, because I don't think there's any healthy explanation in living some sort of fictional having these fictional discussions like, oh yeah, I just happen to, that's from, I know all about due process, like I dreamt about that last night, I got this, right? Like that's not how life works. But I also think there's a certain element where I want the task force members, yourself and anyone else who comes to us, to know that the advice we're giving you, we're doing it with complete candor, that what we're telling you is with our honest assessment of the law, and want you to feel comfortable that we're not doing it because we're afraid it's going to get into the public and whatever that might mean for you, either way. Mm-hmm. Most 99% of what we're saying is so non-controversial that it probably doesn't matter, right? And so a lot of this discussion is going to come down to like, well, it doesn't really, like this doesn't really matter. But knowing that you have the ultimate power to waive that, I think is what's important. So if it's just sort of like common sense discussions about, how does the office, how are we working, how are we operating, what exactly does this complaint mean? I don't understand. What code are you talking about? I don't think those really require a lot of legal analysis. It's me just pointing you to a resource. But when it comes down to like real nitty-gritty legal analysis discussion, I think it is important that you realize that there's this privilege there, that if you're going to be openly, publicly discussing it, that you're going on the other side of the line. Now, to the extent like that it's grounded in a conversation that we had versus a memo, like then it just gets a lot more challenging to figure out, well, how do I specifically waive a conversation? Do I need to do that? I actually don't know the answer to that.
Well, and the thing is,
so it's something to look.
The information, if I can't use it publicly, the information is useless to me. It's almost as if it doesn't matter. Like I might as well not have that at all if I can't use it in a public meeting.
I mean, it's hard to, Helen, it sounds like you want to chime in, but it's hard to talk about this.
Abstractly, yeah.
Yeah, abstractly, exactly. But Helen, did you want to?
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. Hi, Helen Castillo. That I think that's why it's important when you receive memos or legal advice, that as a group that you have to consider waiving, individually, as opposed to having this general policy that you're always going to waive communications with our office, because it's going to depend on a case-by-case basis. Like Mark said, there will be some issues that are more straightforward, just facts, that the complainant may have presented, but you don't need to waive privilege to be able to discuss facts that may have been raised in our memos. However, yes, you would be violating privilege without waiving if you said our city attorney said X, without having gone through the process of examining whether the group as a whole would be waiving that privilege. The privilege sits with you, so it's your prerogative. However, because the privilege sits with the task force in its entirety and not any one individual member, you do have to discuss that on a case-by-case basis.
We often hear this actually from respondents, where they will constantly say to us, our city attorney told us this or that. According to your definition here, they're violating without possibly appropriate authority, violating attorney-client privilege?
Well, it depends, and I guess unfortunately we don't have enough facts. They may have decided, whoever holds that privilege, if it's the department head, they may have decided to waive that privilege prior to sharing that information with the task force, but we can't know that unless you have further conversations.
So then what happens is that the complainant then assumes that that's now public information, and then they request that communication, and then they are met with a response, a resistance, saying that that's protected by attorney-client privilege. But meanwhile, it's been now publicly exposed. And we've had situations, Mark, if you remember, where there were documents that were inadvertently submitted to the record that we had to pull back because they would have been detrimental to existing litigation or what have you. I mean, it's a little different situation, but.
Yeah, I think there's an important distinction between when a city official says, spoke to my counsel, and after advice of counsel, this is the direction we're going. We have concluded that these documents cannot be or are exempt under these provisions. I don't think saying that waives the privilege, right? The fact that you've had a conversation with counsel, these are the results of the conversation, and this is the policy direction you're going to go, I don't think that waives the privilege. A general statement like that.
I have a number of other questions, but just on this point, and I'm going to stop there because due to time, and I want to make sure Helen has time to do her thing. With regards to during a meeting, sometimes we are in need of information in the middle of a hearing of sometimes what we feel to be non-controversial, information that we think an attorney would have readily available or the ability to answer on the spot. And we have had this kind of ability or activity for many, many, many years. And instead, now what we're met with is, well, we'll get back to you, and then it becomes part of the attorney-client privilege process. And then we have to continue the item, which then adds to our backlog. And so when we need it, and there's no way that we could have known to answer that question ahead of time to be able to request an answer from you or advice from you ahead of time. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I don't think there's any sort of intent to delay an answer just so that it can be kept under attorney-client privilege. I don't think that's what you're implying.
I'm not suggesting that. Just saying that is what we've been experiencing. So.
Well, I think we try to give you the best advice, but at the time. But I also think that we take our duty and responsibilities extraordinarily seriously. And if we don't know something with certainty, we don't want to be telling you that, especially in a public forum. Much rather do the research and come back to you with a thorough, thoughtful analysis than just on the fly, like, yeah, that, my gut tells me X, so let's go with that. That's just, I think if, since we're talking in the abstract, I think we're going to want to make sure that if this question just came up to you, it's also just coming up to us too. So we might need, rather than just giving a yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down, we want to be 100% certain with our answer that there's case law or statutes to support it. So generally, if we're not giving you an answer on the spot, it's because we want to make sure that the advice that we want to give is accurate, because we take our duty so seriously.
Okay, thank you. Member Schmidt, and then I'll open it up for the public, but then we'll move on to the next item. Go ahead.
Yeah, just as to that last point, what I would say that the flip side is that you often will see an advice attorney in a hearing who will just make something up on the fly where they really shouldn't. And they should say, I need to look at I need to go to the library and look at the books. And so I would give credence to a good lawyer who says, I'm sorry, I can't answer that right now. I got to go do something. And so the attorney who has an attorney, I think, will try to give advice if they feel that they know enough to give the advice at that time. But then they need to also make that determination as to, I think there may be a lot more here that I need to look at. And so I look at either of those scenarios when I see advice being sought from counsel. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I mean, when it comes to an unknown by anybody in the room, of course, I get that. But it's hard to give an example now, but we've had some questions, which is just as a matter of law, or just as a matter of, course, it's just something fairly basic that we're kind of caught in a conundrum, and and the answer is smack in law that would just help us get through the hearing at that point. That's all. It's hard. I know it's abstract and it's hard to talk about. I get that. Okay. Any public comment on this item? Go ahead, Mr. Sullivan.
And David Pilpel.
Yeah.
No, we're not doing time. Just
No,
Mr. Sullivan, please. What? Go ahead, Cheryl. What?
Okay.
I know we're not doing time. I was just
Okay.
taking down names.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, Ms. Sullivan, just self-facilitate your time because we want to keep the meeting going.
I just have a question. My question is if the attorney gives their work product to the client, then does it become just a matter of client privilege, and that the task force members really don't have to worry about the attorney work product privilege? And then my comment is one of the things the task force is running up against is that the people's right to know how decisions are made. And I think that's what Member LaHood was really getting at. All right. Thank you for your time.
And did David Pilpel have something he wanted to add?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
David Pilpel. So I agree with the thoughtful comments from DCA's Price, Wolf, and Castillo, who I've never met in person, by the way, and the interesting and thoughtful questions of the task force. This does get into difficult territory. I want to take a moment to go back to the memos, which are both a source of inspiration and a source of frustration, I think, for everyone. The memos that the city attorney's office used to draft, some people found helpful on the task force, others not so much, and I think the complainants often found them very helpful, sometimes the respondents, in terms of fleshing out issues. The two things that I thought were particularly useful when those happened were just citing code sections at length, and it was kind of up to the task force to interpret those code sections and apply them to the specific facts, but at least you had the text right there so everyone could say, okay, well, if you're alleging a 67.15b violation, let's look at the text of 67.15b. Okay, there's the language. Like it or not, interpret it how you choose, but that's the language, and we can all see that. And then the memos often also had interesting thoughts on, in order to figure out what to do with this case, the task force might want to ask, when was the records request made? What language was used? What exactly did the department say in their first response? Is this what the complainant was seeking? I mean, they were just kind of like thoughtful questions. No legal answers, no legal conclusions, and the office, I think, was careful over the years not to suggest a conclusion or a path for, well, in some cases, a path for how to resolve a case, but not a suggested conclusion for whether a record was public or whether a meeting violation had occurred or things like that. So it was actually a helpful practice on balance. I want to turn for a second to the relationship between the task force and the office, and again reinforce my suggestion that with a new city attorney, that you may have a chance right now, or in this honeymoon period, to meet with the city attorney and discuss the relationship between, or the unique relationship between this task force and the office, given what's in the law, given the due process screen that otherwise would exist, given the due process screen or ethical wall, whatever you want to call it, that exists now in practice, and number of hours, how to bill, how the task force is represented, et cetera. And other than a litigation context, and there have been a few, but not too many cases involving the ordinance, and as far as I recall, no cases directly involving the task force, that the office's role is primarily to advise the task force on sort of how to conduct its own meetings and stay legal and kosher, but also, again, sort of how to sift through information and making determinations. So let me wrap up by saying that I think the recent example with, what was her name? Dr. Porter Sumchai, where the task force considered whether to waive privilege and ultimately chose to do so. And I haven't seen the documents that were made available as a result. Perhaps they'll be in the chair's report for next week's full task force meeting. But I think that's a good example of where there was presumably analysis, perhaps advice, that was properly protected under the attorney-client privilege, and the task force had a choice and made a choice in a public meeting to waive the privilege and make the information public. And I think that was a good, I don't know whether it was the right choice, but the way it was done, I think, was entirely correct, and that was a policy call for the task force. I think my final point here is where there's, and kind of to paraphrase from CEQA, where there's an analytical path that an attorney or others might use to, if that path can be made known by the attorney, or if conveyed to a member expressed at the meeting. So if you're trying to figure out, is this body a passive meeting body or a policy body, you may want to look at this document or these documents. And if that's true, then that. So, whether or not the complainant or respondent brought those records, you can say, okay, in order to figure this out, why don't we look to that website or this document, or whether the mayor created this or who did what when. And then you start to, the members of the task force may start to form their opinions about the nature of a body and how that impacts the case at hand. Anyway, that's my thought, is that there's a way to go through that without revealing advice received directly from a deputy city attorney, but just sort of replicating that analytical path in a public setting that might aid everybody. Again, I hope that helps. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. And I'll just say on the heels of that, on the first part where he was talking about the legal memos, some things that really were helpful during the analysis that previous legal counsels have provided in those memos was case law that was applicable. and we don't have that ability anymore because we don't have access, the same level of access, or at least exposure to it that might be, at your fingertips. And beyond that, just CPRA and Brown Act that might also come into play. But we've recently had to consider, because with the emergency orders suspending the ordinance locally, the CPRA and the Brown Act are then in full effect at that point. And so scrambling around, having a memo helping us to, guide us to, like, pay attention to this, pay attention to that. It pertains to this particular complaint on these issues. That's where the memos were really, really helpful. And
Can
I
I
have another
just follow
point.
up on that?
Sure, real quick,
Just
because
yeah,
we're
very
running out of
briefly. Yeah, very briefly. I agree with that. So where there are particularly privacy issues implicated, if a memo, or somehow in the grand scheme of things, if someone can say, the San Jose airport case really spoke to that in a way that may be relevant here, or Times Mirror, or McClatchy newspapers, or Copley Press, or whatever, or there's some issue that comes out of FOIA that may have bearing here as applied. So I don't know. That yes, there is value to having those references, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. I want to ask.
Can I just?
Everybody...
We have to move on to
yes.
DCA.
No, I know.
But I think it's important. Sorry, go ahead, Chair Wolf. I'm interrupting you.
I was just going to ask if everybody would be okay to extending the meeting till 9 o'clock. Is that okay with everyone? All right. If you have to leave, okay, great. I see thumbs up. Okay, great. Let's move on to Helen's portion.
I'm sorry to take away your time, Helen. I just wanted to respond to one little thing about the memos, and that is, sure. I think it's really important. We sort of listen to a lot of the comments that you've made about the lack of these legal memos, and don't offer our perspective or response much. So I think it's important for you to hear a couple of things that this task force might not always get to hear, or members of the public, is that we do still provide legal advice. And in fact, I feel like now between Helen and I are working harder and more at providing legal advice than when those memos were routinely written. And what I mean by that is these legal memos that the task force would get were very much a factual summary of the case. And so what I'm trying to say is that in no way do I dispute that those are not helpful. I think we all agree that those summaries are incredibly helpful, which is precisely why the task force says, oh, I wish we still had them. But in terms of a resource that the city attorney's office that we can provide you, it's much more valuable of our time to dig into the legal issues, to listen to the legal analysis that you require, to point that out, than to spend all of the time and hours writing the factual summaries. So I think from our perspective, it's reframing as this is important work that should still be done somehow, and maybe for the task force to find a way to find the resources to do that. But I don't want members of the public or the task force to think that DCA Castillo and I are suddenly not working for the task force or not doing legal analysis, because I feel like that's a lot of what we're hearing sometimes at these meetings, and I just want to make sure that's from our perspective. That's not what is done, but I really think that this can be a discussion for a whole nother meeting, and this was not on the agenda. So I think we should move on to DCA.
No, I agree, and I will add that to the list, because I think there's value in both sides of the argument, but I think we really do need to flush it out, because there is a lot of value that we were getting from it before on the distillation of the issues that only legal mind can bring to the table. And we are not that, except for Member Schmidt. Okay. Helen.
Okay. So the second item on the agenda was new codes or statutes that are coming down the wire or that took effect January of 2022. Aside from, although AB 361, excuse me, was signed into law in September and October, this is very much in effect until 2024. And so I wanted to raise that point. And our city attorney memo, excuse me, I'm so sorry, that was issued in November of 2021 does lay out, I'm sorry, November 15th, 2021, as well as September 28th, 2021 does lay out the various implications. However, there is one additional one, which is Senate Bill 274, which says that if the city has a website technology, then the agendas and accompanying documents must be emailed to the requester. And in the event that the documents are too voluminous, you have to mail them. Although you can reference the web links to those documents, but if you can't, somehow you don't have the technology to be able to send all those documents, then you need to mail it. So those were the pertinent ones that I had. And I can read you the various points of AB 361, but I think that since you've had the memos and it would be the same as if you were reading it, I can answer some questions about those and how the mayor's order affected policy bodies' ability to meet as a group in public. One thing I will say is, which I will cover in the next part, talking about the impact of the mayor's termination of the March 2020 order, is that she has not terminated certain provisions that apply to the public, the policy body's abilities to meet in person. So that is still in effect, and it has not been terminated by the mayor or the Board of Supervisors. So, all right. Do you have any questions before I move on to the next section?
Just a question as to specifically only policy bodies?
Well, no, passive bodies can meet. However, the requirements for notice and the public's ability to comment and speak, those have also loosened. That's discussed in that memo on the very last page. Here you go. Okay. The mayor's March 23rd, 2020 order suspended the notice and access rules that normally apply to gatherings of passive meeting bodies. Under the mayor's order, these gatherings they may occur, but the public notice and attendance rules do not apply during that period. And even though these gatherings are legally permissible under the mayor's order, members generally should not meet in person for the same reasons reflected in the mayor's order prohibiting in-person meetings of policy bodies, which is due to the health concerns and the safety that is discouraged.
So that means they can meet in secret and not let anybody know that they're meeting.
No, they cannot meet in secret. I think what it's saying is that certain passive meeting bodies, like, for example, Sunshine Ordinance normally requires limited public notice and public access to passive meeting bodies that are not policy bodies, and that during this period, some of those rules have been relaxed.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Right.
All right.
Members and public members, any? Okay, hearing none. Okay, great. There's no action on this, just discussion. let's move on to the next item.
Great. So item number 9 pertains to the impact of the mayor's termination of the emergency order suspending certain provisions of the Sunshine Ordinance regarding the public records requests. In November, I believe it was 16th, I circulated our city attorney memo as well as some highlights of the provisions that were significantly impacted during the mayor's termination, during the March 2020 order being in place, and then the termination. The most important ones were that as for the immediate disclosure requests, the mayor's March 2020 order had suspended this immediate disclosure request requirement. However, after the termination of the order, the departments must respond within 1 business day to requests for the IDR requests. The deadlines to respond for requests for descriptions of public records during the suspension, the city was not required to comply with that requirement, but the departments must now respond within 7 days to requests for a statement describing the agency's records on particular subject. The general balancing, which was permitted under the mayor's order, the city departments could rely on California Government Code Section 6255 to withhold documents based on a determination that the public interest in non-disclosure clearly outweighed the public interest in disclosure. The city departments can no longer rely on the balancing test in Government Code Section 6255 to withhold records per the Sunshine Ordinance. And then disclosure of information regarding contract negotiations. The mayor's order had suspended that requirement, and the departments now must make certain disclosure of information during contract negotiations. And then lastly, the deadline to respond to standard records requests. Under the mayor's order, the departments were able to respond to requests within an initial response period stating whether the disclosable records existed or not, providing an estimated date when the department would make the records available. Now the departments must provide copies of records within 10 calendar days of a request or within a 14-day extension period. And I know that we'll have discussion on that. Do you have any questions at this juncture, or do you want me to continue?
Members? I mean, my pet peeve on the 14-day extension. This has been somewhat long-standing since the inception of the Sunshine Task Force. That the task force, in its ability to provide enhancement for efficiency and expediency, has disallowed that 14-day extension, and the requirement is just 10 days. Now, you dispute that with us?
Well, I'd like to think rather than dispute. I certainly can't speak about what occurred prior to our representation. However, I agree that local jurisdictions can certainly, under 6253E, they can adopt requirements that allow for faster, more efficient, greater access to records. I think that's the section you're referring to. Yes. It allows for that. And I think when the Sunshine Ordinance was amended, the immediate disclosure request was added with the process for extending the time period. The amendment also included a change where the balancing test was no longer permitted, so that 6255 could not be used when making a determination of whether to release records or not. However, the Sunshine Ordinance is silent as to essentially eliminating 6253C, which allows for the extension of time in regular standard requests. So in other words, if you had language in the Sunshine Ordinance that explicitly stated that we are now, sorry, I'm looking for the word, we are essentially eliminating this extension time period, you would, one, it should state so, and it does not state so. And if you look at Sunshine Ordinance 67, sorry, lost my page, 67.25 B, it references a section in the California Government Code 6451.1 that had expired actually prior to the Sunshine Ordinance being passed by the voters. And regardless, that time period and the time period specified under that, as well as 6256, talked about the 10 days, 10 business days, which equates to 14 calendar days, essentially. And to the extent that 67.25 in setting forth the process for immediacy of response, reflecting the unusual circumstances described in 6253 section C, is mirrored except for the last component, which is number 4, the need to compile data to write programming language or computer program. That was added post later on. Oh, and the other point is that that when the voters amended the ordinance to create the IDR process, the provisions of 6253C, that was in effect, and that used the 14 calendar days as the maximum time frame for extension. And that time frame is the one that is reflected in the Sunshine Ordinance. So absent specific language prohibiting a extension of time for standard requests, one is led to interpret that too applies for the standard requests as it does for immediate disclosure requests. So that was a lot of information. I'm sure that you have some questions.
Yeah, that is a lot, and I think it would be appropriate to, if we can get that somehow in writing, outlining each of those sections, so that we can take them one at a time, because
sure,
some of
it's
them
actually in writing in the November 16th, 2021. I took it directly from there.
Okay.
The one that we circulated. And I can elaborate a little bit on the point, I think Member Schmidt had inquired so in reference to, when Mark and I are acting in our capacity as the task force deputy city attorneys, we have been assigned to work with you. However, under the charter, it is the city attorney who is the attorney for the city, and on issues like AB 361 or the interpretation of certain code provisions that come down that are new or that require some sort of legal analysis.
Well, I would go ahead. I would just say, it's hard pressed because the amendments to the ordinance also require that the legal advisor advocate on behalf of the task force. And at the same time, the ordinance does state that the law be interpreted broadly and not narrowly for the benefit of the public. So, there's that. It's not. Call it a balancing test. To me, it's like that's our job, is to interpret the law broadly, and not to nitpick it.
Sure, and I'm glad you brought up the word advocate. It is a situation that is unlike a litigation, where if you were being sued and we were assigned to be your litigation attorneys, we would certainly advocate in a different way than in the role that we are playing currently, which is as legal advisors. So in that capacity, we review the law, we make interpretations. You may or may not agree with the interpretation, but they are what our advice may be. And in circumstances where they apply to things like this, you know, the Sunshine Ordinance timelines or the impact of the mayor's order, it is applied to the entire city and city departments, and that those are situations when the city attorney does issue a memo because it applies throughout the entire city. So in those situations, while you may disagree with our legal interpretation, it is not within our role to advocate against an advice that is the city attorney's advice, which is given, that is not in relation to specific files that are being discussed, or, you know, a situation that Mark described where there is a firewall. Those are just policy matters that are discussed for the entire city. So that's the one distinction I wanted to make. So, but I understand you disagree with our interpretation of the timelines. So, but I just wanted to explain a little bit in greater detail the analysis of why we interpret the 14 days versus the 10 days that you've noted, and why we reference the code sections that are no longer in effect. However, they apply to the extent that they talk about the 10 business days versus 14 calendar days.
What I find interesting is that after 5, I think maybe 6 city attorneys under the Sunshine Ordinance and all the other DCAs that have served us, no one has ever brought up this interpretation before. We've gotten no advice or directives from anyone. And that's how it's been for 20 years. So that's why it's a little alarming, I think, for some of us. I'll hand it over to Member Schmidt. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, let me ask you, I don't want to do a law and motion argument here. No need for that. But I want to get some foundational information. I know there was some back and forth with our chair about this 14-day, and I was very interested to see what the reasoning was. And it looks like now we are, now it's here. There's this reasoning. I may not have read it fully back then. First, I'm going to ask you, Ms. Castillo, the reasoning on the 14-day, did you yourself personally write that, or do you know if Mark wrote it, or did that come from the other side of the wall?
What I just said to you?
Yeah, the analysis.
What do you mean by, are you talking about? Okay, so
someone created it.
No, I read, what I was reading from are twofold. One, I did my own review of section 6253 and the Sunshine Ordinance, because the city attorney memo also says, what I read to you was from the city attorney memo. However, after reviewing the 6253 as well, because I too was curious, because Chair Wolf has consistently stated that he disagrees with the city attorney's interpretation. So I went through and looked at that. And when I compared 6253 versus the language in 6725, when you're looking at the immediacy of the response, except for number 4 of the unusual circumstances, the other 3 are consistent in that if the reason, of course, you always want to err on the side of providing the documentations on the earlier side, but in the event that you ever run into a situation where you can't, then you would look to those unusual circumstances to see if it warrants additional days. And under the Sunshine Ordinance, although it's under the immediacy of response, it mirrors the same bases as 6253C. And
okay, I think that answers my question.
Yes.
Are you also?
I'm not looking for substance.
Are you also claiming that it applies to 6721 too?
6721.
6725 is just the IDR, but 6721 is the largesse of the responsibility to respond within for a standard request, not an IDR.
Yes, I'm talking about the standard request, that because the Sunshine Ordinance did not explicitly, affirmatively eliminate the extension requirement, it would apply there as well.
Okay, so it would have had, so you're stating that it would have to explicitly, I guess a good word would be repeal the extension, because the local agency has been given the privilege of increasing expediency and the enhancement. But you're stating that because it wasn't explicit, that the implication is not enough?
Right, because in under the IDR and the provision eliminating the balancing test under 6255, you would have spelled it out and added a provision as the local jurisdiction eliminating that extension period under the standard request. I mean, it would make sense, because by amending other provisions, that's exactly what the local jurisdiction did. You included the IDR and also eliminated the balancing test requirement. So it would lead to reason that if the local jurisdiction intended to eliminate the extension period under the standard request, one would have been affirmatively explicitly stated, as it was with IDR and the provision regarding the balancing test. So.
Dean.
I wasn't quite done.
Sorry.
That's all right. So it sounds like the document came from the other side of the wall. There's someone over there who wrote this for the whole city. And one reason I ask is I didn't want to get personal, but after reading this, I'm not convinced. And I think I've realized that I think I probably would Chair Wolf on this 14-day thing. Looking at it with my legal analysis, the reasoning just, and I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to, make the argument, not make the argument, etc. But I wanted to just check. So I'm sorry. That's my dog. I wanted to ask you, do you have any reason not to agree with the analysis of the city attorney on this point?
No.
Okay. So your advice to us would be the same advice that we would get from receiving this same memo. It would be the same language that, in substance, you would give to us, correct? Maybe you said something that you might add, but that's your advice to us on the 14-day, right?
Right. And when it comes to issues like this, the city, I guess, the way I would describe it is, if Mark and I were representing you as a private client, we would not, in other words, I am not going to advocate for a different position or come out to the client that my position is different than Mark's, because we are your legal counsel. And in that sense, the city attorney's office is the legal counsel for the city. So when they make a legal interpretation of the law on such matters, we are going to speak with one voice. This is not the situation where I know Chair Wolf has said that you would expect us to advocate your position we have provided you legal advice, and certainly it is your prerogative whether you decide to accept that legal advice, but that is the legal advice. And I don't know what else to say.
No, that's great. And a lot of that, I have an advantage because I've been in your role. And so I know all this. Although I want people to see, that when we hear from you, there's a certain chair, a certain hat you wear. And so you've been helpful in just sort of demonstrating to us, what the restrictions are, what the hat is, what your role is here for us. Okay.
Right, and that role comes from the San Francisco Charter. So it's not something that I independently and personally am advocating for. It's what's required of us under the Charter. So.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Nothing further from me.
Anyone else? All right. Back to you, Chair Wolf. Oh, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. So I'm sure that this will be an ongoing discussion, and we'll break out that document again and make sure that we understand it, because then that will change. The question then becomes, it's almost like what happens retroactively to all the decisions that we've made that we have not been advised on. If we deem this to be the fact and the case, what then happens retroactively?
Sure. And it was the document that I forwarded to Cheryl to be included in the agenda, and I know that you had it from November. So it's the same memo that I'm referencing, but you can also get it on the city attorney's website online, and it's the November 16th, 2021 memo, and I also refer you to the September 28th, 2021 memo regarding the policy bodies and being able to meet under the order.
Right.
And, I did, because I am the newest attorney assigned to advise you, I did ask Mark, and I did look back to see, and I just simply think that, the advice has been given. And as I said, it's your prerogative whether you want to take advice that we've given you, but this is not the first time that we've discussed the 10 days and 14 days. Maybe not as explicitly, but it's been there. So.
But not before Mark.
I can't speak to that.
That's what I'm saying, because that's where the rubber meets the road, is because up until this point, we've not heard any concerns about this, even from previous city attorneys, and even from DCA Zarefsky. Even though they, it's been maintained in the Good Government Guide, and our opposition to that, and even when the city attorney comes as a party to a complaint, it still has not been brought up to us. So that's why it's alarming and a bit shocking, I think, for those of us that have been around for a while.
Understood.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I don't know, it says anonymous, but I think who is that? Who has their hand raised?
Mr. Pilpel.
Okay. I want to try. We got one more item I think we want to squeeze in before 9, so you can make it quick. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to go over. I made some notes based on the last discussion. I just wanted to go over what I have, and I'm happy to share this with the deputy city attorneys and all of you through Cheryl, et cetera. What I noted as the brief legislative history here. So prior to 1993, there was just the Brown Act and the California Public Records Act, or CPRA. In 1993, the Sunshine Ordinance was passed by the Board of Supervisors and Mayor Jordan, and that was largely drafted by Randy Riddle. with Buck Delventhal and perhaps others in the office. And unfortunately, both Randy and Buck have passed away in the last couple of years. Huge loss for the city. Meanwhile, the Brown Act, and I thought CPRA, but I think it was only the Brown Act, had some fairly significant amendments in 1994 that were carried by Quentin Kopp and largely drafted by Terry Frank of the California Newspaper Publishers Association. And that had some impact all the way around here. There were various amendments to Sunshine, the Brown Act, and CPRA in the rest of the 90s from 1993 to 1998. In 1999, thanks. In 1999, San Franciscans for Sunshine got Proposition G on the ballot, which was passed by the voters, which locked in various provisions for a number of years until the more recent Peskin Charter Amendment that arguably allows the Board of Supervisors to now make amendments to the ordinance without going back to the voters. There were other amendments to the Brown Act and CPRA from 1999 to 2002. I think it was the 2002 election when Prop 59 was on the ballot. Might have been 2004. I can't remember now. Authored by then Senator, I think, John Burton, which had the language about broadly construing if it makes it more public and narrowly construing if it makes it less public. Various other Brown Act and CPRA amendments from 2003 to present, and the more recent Sunshine amendments related to calendars. So that's my quick legislative history. I think I've got hopefully all of that right, or at least most of it, and I was a party to some of that. Bottom line on the 10-day, 14-day question, as I understand it, an IDR or immediate disclosure request has to be responded to within 24 hours or by the close of the next business day after the day it's received, except when such a request is objectively not immediately available under the plain language of what constitutes an IDR. Departments can invoke an extension on an IDR for either 10 business or 14 calendar days, depending on what you look at and all of that, going back to the ledge history. And finally, on a regular request, it's 10 business or 14 calendar days, and departments can again invoke an extension of an additional 10 business or 14 calendar days. And I acknowledge that in the drafting of Prop G in 1999, among the various drafting problems and errors, there was at least one, if not several, incorrect code references in CPRA, or 26253, whatever it was at the time. And I strenuously argued that they should check all of those things, and was told, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. Let's just get it done. And so there were drafting problems with Prop G, and I think that's what DCA Castillo was referring to. Anyway, I hope some of that history and my suggestion about the 10 business and 14 calendar days helps someone somewhere, somehow. And I'm happy to, again, put that in writing if those notes are useful for anyone. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much for that history. Okay. Seeing no other public comment on this item and no action, no other, I don't see any other hands. Want to just quickly, and thank you, DCA Castillo and Price Wolf. Appreciate your time and your contributions.
Sure.
Just the last item I just want to cover is meeting duration. That seems to be on people's minds, on my mind. And we haven't even, there's another 2 items that we didn't get to on this agenda. I don't want to keep us here any longer. So one, I want to have just a general discussion about what's happening with our meetings and why they're getting so long, and which is somewhat novel because in previous years it's not been like that. And then also just for any additional items like we're discussing tonight, to maybe schedule another one of these types of meetings where we can have a little more freer free flow discussion about items. So open the floor to that. Member LaHood.
I think there are a couple of things going on. So I think in an attempt to get through more cases, I think if we were to look at agendas from a couple of years ago versus agendas today, I think they're longer. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't. Some of them really have many items on them. I think also perhaps because we have been doing these meetings remotely and we're at home, maybe psychologically there's less of a feeling that we need to rush through because we're already home, and yet we end up in 5, 6, 7, 8 hour, 9 hour meetings, and we're all totally exhausted. And I think could be offering. I think if our meetings didn't go so long, I think it would be easier for all of us. And maybe there's a tipping point after which we're trying to get more done, and in fact we are less efficient because we've gone on for too long. I would be willing to throw in like an extra, and I think you suggested this, an extra short meeting a month in order to be done with, in order to cut the long meetings. I would rather take the last 2 hours of a really long meeting and throw it on to another day of the week. And perhaps the irony is because we are meeting remotely and we don't need physical space that we may not have access to, perhaps now is the time to do that and get ahead.
Well, you can look at, the archive of our agendas is there, and you can look back, and it's always been 4 to 5 complaints a meeting.
But we have more than 4 or 5. If I look back at recent ones, there have been more than 4 or 5 items because I open all the tabs, and sometimes I go out to 12, 14 tabs. If I'm going out to 14 tabs, even though that's including the agenda and the minutes and the administrator's report, that's 8 or 9 items on the agenda.
No, I'm talking about complaints alone, because the other items are just standard. The opening roll call, public comment, minutes, administrator's report. We used to have more extensive chair report, but a lot of this stuff is being done in open meetings. It's not a whole lot to report. And then announcements, which we never really happened. So there are those standards that are there, but they don't take up any more time than they used to. It's just the complaints are getting longer and longer. We're running anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes per complaint. And a lot of it has to do with complexity, because I'd be honest with you, again, not having those, what our legal counsel is calling summaries, what we used to call legal memos, would provide folks with a lot more information at the head of a meeting to be able to quickly get to the questions and to the meat of the matter. So that's what I'm noticing.
I'll second Member LaHood's motion.
Okay.
And I'll sacrifice my complaint committee slot if we can get some cases finished. I like her idea.
If there's any committees that there's only one committee that cannot really disappear, and that's the complaint committee. That's how things have been written here. It's the primary. But let's get before we get a motion. Let's see, Vice Chair Yankee, you want to chime in here?
Kind of jumping on to what Member LaHood said. Like, I looked at November, and I think she's right. We had 7 hearings, not talking about consent agenda items, and then the other stuff. We literally had 7 files on that agenda. So I think some of them have been growing, and I think that's probably, recognizing we have a backlog, but at the same time, I think she's absolutely right that we hit that point where, particularly for those ones that get very lengthy, I'm not sure we're actually being more efficient by getting beyond like the 4 or 5, that it may actually start to be decreasing our efficiency. And I think she's also absolutely right that, it's a little different when you're at home. And I think we all probably have to do sometimes a better job self-facilitating and relieving, when we're starting to come up on that 45 minutes, an hour, and we're still kind of veering off course sometimes on some of these. I think we all kind of have to, redirect ourselves to, hey, are we going to get a resolution tonight? Or maybe this is, something we should consider, continuing it. I think, I've noticed that some cases are great. We can plow right through, and other ones, it seems that, an hour and a half later, and we're still not even close to a motion. And maybe that's one of those where we just say, you know what, maybe we need to just start fresh on a new conversation on this another time and continue. As much as I hate to have people come back or whatever, but I think that's right. And I'm fine with doing some of these, I think, supplemental meetings, particularly ones that don't have cases. I think it lets us discuss some of these other topics, that kind of seem to be rushed at 11 o'clock at night. And, I think, these are some important policy discussions that we're having. And I think let's have, a better frame of mind than being 7-8 hours into it. And so, as long as they work for, everyone's schedules, I think this is, a good thing, particularly keeping them 2-3 hours like this. This seems to be a good, good way to do it.
Okay, I have a suggestion, but Member Stein, and then we'll go to, I think it's David Popel. It keeps coming up as anonymous. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I concur that I find the meetings to be, brutally long at times. And I wonder if there are, processes that we could put in place that might make them more efficient as well. And, one idea, I'm not married to it at all, but one idea I would throw out is maybe having time limits on how much time each member can spend asking questions, or maybe doing a frequent kind of, after a half an hour saying, is anyone ready to make a motion, just to see if there's a motion that would be supported at that point. Just things that we could potentially do in the process to not have as much time be used inefficiently.
Well, my observation from my vantage is that when we're in that point of deliberation to make a motion, 5 minutes can go by in silence with no motion. And, that, also presses upon things. People want to ask more questions because it's not clear what the conclusion should be. So I don't know how to remedy that.
Yeah, I just thought that perhaps if every member had a limited time to ask questions, it might be to really try to boil down the case for them, or what do they think the issues are. You could always vote perhaps to extend that time, or you could defer your time to somebody else. I'm just throwing it out because it's a way that congressional hearings are approached. And it's also the way court cases are kind of approached. There's often a limited time set, and you just have to hear the case in that limited amount of time.
Okay, David.
I appreciate the comments from the gentle lady from the other side of town. I wanted to make a couple of suggestions about meeting scheduling. Some of the meetings now start at, the main task force starts at 4, some of the other meetings start at 5:30. Depending on people's schedules, you might want to think about just starting everything at 4 for a while. If you can rustle up a quorum and make that work, I think starting earlier allows you to get more done and allows various folks to start earlier. Just a thought. And if you're going to have complaint meet every month to try to, do some pre-processing of things, then maybe EOT and CAC only need to meet every other month. One meets in odd-numbered months and the other meets in even-numbered months, and the slot that they were occupying otherwise could be your second meeting of the full task force, and try that for a few months and see if that whacks away at the backlog. Those are some thoughts. Perhaps that's helpful. Thanks.
Member Wong.
I think we have tried multiple times to institute some time limits to some of these files, but I don't think we've ever been very strict about it. And I think we need to try being more strict about it, where it could mean Cheryl's just sharing her video and it's just a timer. I think we actually need a timer to be up there for us to see. I mean, that was something that was standard in hearing rooms, and we don't have something like that virtually.
Just wondering, go ahead. No, I'll hold my thought. Member Neighbors, go ahead.
I definitely agree with Member Wong. I feel like there's a kind of a slippery slope here when we add a meeting, but we don't do the housekeeping of managing our own behavior in meetings first, or exploring it more thoroughly to see what it is that's taking us so long in these deliberations. Because I think a lot of us probably come in, if we've thoroughly read the packet, come in with an idea of what the motion should be. I come in with one written out for every case I'm going to hear. But sometimes what happens in the course of questionings is there are some very specific pathways that get gone down for a very long time, and they may or may not be as important to that motion, the ultimate motion or the outcome, as the amount of time that they're getting in that discussion. And so having a stricter time limit, I guess first having everybody, one of the things I was thinking when Mark and Helen were here is I went back and read, as a new member, a lot of the memos that weren't happening anymore. And I just started writing them myself for every, as prepping for the meeting. I wrote my own Mark memo. What would Mark write in his memo, right? I wrote a summary paragraph. I wrote the questions that would seem to be the key questions. And then I wrote out my potential for a motion, and lots of my motions were not great, or they weren't on track, or they needed more stuff or whatever, but at least they were on the floor, right? At least they were out there. And I think that idea of having a clock, having a timer, and not just an imaginary one, but maybe an actual one, and really sticking to it, and then doing some self-analysis. If we really can't get a case heard in a certain amount of time, then let's take a look at it and say, oh, it's because of complexity versus, oh, we went down a rabbit hole, or nobody made a motion and we sat there in silence for 5 minutes or whatever, but give some really structured thought to it. I would prefer to do that before adding another meeting to my schedule, because I don't know that I can keep up with the task force given the amount of time and prep, and then to add another meeting too. I just don't think I can.
Chair Wolf, Member Highland here. I'm not on the phone, so
go
I'd
ahead.
chime in if I could. I like what all the members are saying. I know there was a time where Vice Chair Yankee was reminding us of time limits, but then we plowed right through his gentle hurdles. So I think if we look at the breakdown of a typical case, 5 minutes for the plaintiff, 5 minutes for the respondent, I think we should set a 10-minute clock for deliberation, and then we go to rebuttals, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. Now we're at 26 minutes. That should give us 3 to 4 minutes to form a motion or not and vote. Public comment. Public comment's always additional, but we should be able to do the nuts and bolts of a case in 30 minutes, not counting public comment. Now I know at the beginning, of each term when we have new members, some of the older members spend a bit more time and go into a little more history and quite honestly take us down those rabbit holes. And, you know, there were a couple of times where the predominant voice for the whole evening was the chairs. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think this group is one of the best groups I've worked with, talented, on the spot, on the ball. I think we should trust them to, you know, make their determinations, get to motions more quickly. You know, some of it are, you know, we do have these almost academic digressions. That can be for retreats like this, but I think we all have to really, really curtail ourselves and stick to a 10-minute limit. The other thing I think that's been quite useful, which we didn't used to do in the past, but the administrators provide us sometimes with, you know, our cliff notes, if you like. That's been great. It kind of just refreshes everyone, gets them back to where we were. I think the subcommittee chairs are doing a good job with the summaries, really getting us to focus on, members should look at this code 26, 27.6, whatever it is, to really kind of narrow the focus and get right to the salient details from the get-go. Now, on the flip side of that, I have to say, we've spent a lot of time the last couple of years correcting administrative errors in meeting time. That cannot continue. That's just been a real drain on us. It's making us look bad in front of the public. It's taking our time. We're having to go over stuff, redo minutes, spending 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes on minutes every subcommittee. It's getting better, but that's an obvious place where we can improve on. So those are my thoughts. I mean, I think we should have a 10-minute clock, go to rebuttals, and then we've got to get the admin side tightened up. I think, if we get that new staff, those extra, if you like, almost, what's the term, paralegals or whatever staff we may or may not get would certainly help that. But that's an area we can certainly improve on. And then, we just have to table those academic rabbit holes and put them aside and look at them in the retreats, or say, this is too complex. We're going to open a separate file on this and come back to this. But I think we really, really have to crack on that 30-minute limit. That's my thoughts. Thanks.
So I'll say one is I'm trying not to have items be continued, because if there's not enough discussion to get to a motion, then and 30 minutes comes up and we're not there, then the only thing we can do is continue the item. And then we start continuing more and more items. We end up with the following meeting being all, continued items from previous meetings. And scheduling is very hard then. So without having an extra meeting, at least a short meeting for two complaints, just so we can, try to pare things down. I'm listening to what everybody's saying. That's just one suggestion. The other thing is to what I had thought, but to invoke the expedited process. So the project catalytic process, that we send out the affirmation letter to every respondent in every complaint, asking them if they admit noncompliance, plead no contest, or disagree with the complaint. We can then start filtering all the no contest and the admissions into a consent agenda. And that would help also drastically reduce that's the idea, so that reduce the backlog using that expedited process.
I think Dean's hand's been up for quite some time.
Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, I'm over here. A lot of what I've heard, I'm in totally agreement with. There's just one point which I think my perception of, if we spend 9 hours, very little of that is actually questioning the witnesses. I think there's just a huge amount of just talk, and that's what causes these meetings to go 9 hours. Now, I don't know how we limit that. I have no solutions to it, but to me, it's not the question answer to the witnesses. It's much more like we are just like talking to ourselves. That's where the time is going.
David, did you have something else you wanted to say?
No, sorry. I'll lower my hand.
All right. Well, so kind of behind the scenes, Matt and I do try to keep time as much as possible and nudge each other. It's like, it's time for rebuttals. Let's get with emotion, you know, that kind of thing. But we're not trying to push you all to that hard, you know, because either we haven't been able to formulate emotion, or there's just, you know, just a discussion that's happening, and don't really want to be rude and interrupt you. So how do you want to do this? We got 5 minutes for each party opening statement. Then there's a, you know, untimed period of time for question and answer. And it's just for clarification of the facts or the details. Then we have 6 minutes of rebuttals, and then there's an untimed period to develop a motion, and that's it. That's our structure. Because we'll do it starting, you know, next week, next week, 2 weeks, next week. And I can hang a clock right here, if that helps.
I think I see Lori stand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the structure's great. It's only as great as adhering to it. And I think I've seen Vice Chair Yankee many times in the chat saying, okay, like, you know, we've been on this, and I've seen Member Highland too. We've been on this item this many times, and we've been on this item this many times. Then I've also seen it be kind of ignored, right? And we just keep going. And it has been too gentle, for sure. But I'm not sure what the other side of that looks like. I don't think what does it look like for it not to be gentle, for us to adhere to it? I think that has to come from you, Chair Wolf, because you're the one who has the authority to say, we're pulling the plug on this, let's go. And I think it's probably harder for Matt and for Vice Chair Yankee and Member Highland to strong arm that, and you know, in the chat or whatever. So I would say, like, yeah, let's do it, and you know, go get it.
Okay, so I think I'm more than happy to be more strict with the time frames, and so when, like, the question and answer period, I shut that down in 5 minutes, you know, you know, and if I interrupt you and say, okay, wrap it up, you know, not feel like I'm being rude, you know, because I don't want to appear or be perceived as cutting, you know, people off, especially women. I'm very sensitive to that. So I want to just be clear and upfront that I'm not doing it to be disrespectful, that we're all agreeing that this is how we're going to move forward.
So I think what we need then is, what tools we have to tell you when you're the one who needs to stop talking. Is there an option for that? Because you've got, like, you'll be able to shut us down, but I heard Member Highland say that.
I just won't
Oh.
participate.
I'm talking on the floor. Excuse me.
Sorry.
I heard Member Highland say that he was kind of mapping a lot of that talk coming from you also. And so, you know, what we don't have, and I think what's hard for Vice Chair Yankee or Member Highland is because you're the chair is to say like, hey, you've been on this road a long time. So we just need a tool to be able to say that too, I think, to be able to say like, you know, what is the signal to stop that too?
Well, I will be honest with you. The reason why I step in and chime in is because no one else is. We'll get into the question and answer period and it's silence. So, okay, are we ready for rebuttals? We get to rebuttals and then we get into, is there a motion? And then there's a very long silence. There's no motion. So what are we doing a justice to the parties by not, you know, participating in the process? And that's why I will try to, you know, at least step in and try to jumpstart some idea of to figure out how to move it forward. It's not unique. This has happened in previous years, many times. So it's not necessarily unique. Go ahead.
Chair Wolf, Member Highland here. So I think two tools would be useful. Is if we have literally a shot clock that we can all see on Microsoft Teams, the same clock maybe Cheryl uses, or just another clock that runs concurrent with it. And most important, we'll pay attention to that 10-minute shot clock where it's before us, and then, you know, during the process of rebuttals, members can still have time to listen in and to formulate those motions. And then, you know, we can, after the rebuttals are over, invite a motion. And if someone wants to, you know, extend on some point, that's where we talk about it. Say, okay, this might require another 10-minute shot clock, and we can take a vote on that. Or we can just say, I'm going to put a motion up, or if you hear no motion, it doesn't have to be motion. That's a sign that no member is feeling that there's a motion on that, and we'll just have to trust that we've heard enough to do it justice. You know, sometimes when there's no motion, the motion fails and it's dismissed without prejudice. So all those things. And yes, you definitely have, you know, facilitated to help sometimes, but you know, sometimes we've gone down these academic rabbit holes, which you know, in some cases, I mean, in most cases, they're very important. We have to do that, especially for complex issues. But sometimes we've really gone on when it wasn't necessary, because you know what, 35 minutes, 45 minutes later, we're right back at the same point. So a lot of that goes to, you know, the subcommittee chairs really doing that. You know, those are 2-3 hour meetings. Go down the rabbit holes, explore all that as much as you can, and then focus our aperture when it comes to the full task force. That's part of the process of preparing, you know, the issues and getting apples to apples and getting everything in front of us. But you know, if we can have a visible shot clock, and let's try sticking to it, see what happens. Let's see what the work product is that comes out. I have faith in the task force that I think will still get it right most of the time. And you know, maybe that's what we need to do with this backlog. You know, good enough is good right now for a while. And then when we have retreats and other things, we can you know, parse out things and go into more depth and set, you know, policy body, you know, I mean, set SOTF standards and whatnot on those kind of things. The other thing I was going to throw in is it possible to, you know, have administrators report every other meeting, or some of those administrative things that we do, and that might allow us to take on an extra case. Because so many of the hold on, I haven't finished, Cheryl. I'm just kind of throwing this out to the group, and I'm just saying, you know, that's and they're getting short shrift because they're at the end of a 7-8 hour meeting as well. You know, why not have that appear earlier, like item 2 or 3, and we all have our full attention, and we get a lot more work done, and then move forward. Anyhow, those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Okay, Cheryl.
No, I just wanted to say what Chris just said right now, and that is that you guys are not spending a lot of time on this report, and it takes me probably 2 hours, maybe even more, just to put together, between providing the list of emails that I get every month, doing the calculations on how many cases are heard before the task force and what are set to be heard at committee, and to do it for each year. And then keep track of all the public correspondence that I get, make sure the complaint committee minutes are included if I have time to do them. It takes time. But if you want to do it at the beginning of the meeting, that's fine. My feeling is that, you guys don't pay attention to it. And it makes me wonder, how important is it to you?
Well, I read it. I may not comment on it, but I read it. I mean, it's important for me to keep track of a lot of things, especially communications. So just because I don't say anything, I personally, if I don't say anything, it's not that I don't appreciate that you're doing it and the information is not there. It's just cogent. It's everything I need. I have no questions.
Yeah, Chair Wolf, I dropped off for a second, so I just heard the end of Cheryl's comment. I'm not picking on the administrator's report in particular. I'm just saying some of our admin things, if perhaps they could be done every other month, so we can get through the cases. Just a thought. And having them further up might be efficient. Have like a double admin report or a double chair report, whatever it is, covering 2 months worth. Just that's what I was trying to get to. Thank you.
Okay, Matt, Vice Chair Yankee.
Yeah. Just talk to a little bit about how we formulate our motions, and I think there's the technical part that I know there's certain ways we need to structure our motions to meet ethics requirements and be clear for the orders of determination. I think that's important we do that. But separately, I sometimes think that there may be some reluctance, and I know certainly I've had some reluctance. And, do you want to form that perfect motion, right? And you're afraid if you put a motion out, someone might want to tweak it this way and tweak it that way. And we've seen, in several of the minutes where we've seen 2 or 3 sets of amendments. And so I think that starts to make some of those deliberations very convoluted. And so I would suggest, and maybe we try letting each of those motions kind of stand alone. If someone wants to find a violation for one thing, we can vote on that. If someone has another idea, maybe then subsequently they can raise that as a separate motion. Just because we have one motion doesn't mean the item's closed. But I think there's a lot of back and forth and discussions to formulate that one perfect motion. And I think that seems to be somewhat time consuming when we do that. Invites, a lot of, well, I think this one, why don't you include this? I don't want that in there. And I think if we maybe took each of those separate points and voted on them separately, it might at least streamline things and get it through a little bit faster.
So more motions.
I would say potentially more motions, but more clear and concise ones that we can go through. I'd rather see 5 minutes per motion and do 3 motions than do one long 30-minute motion. And yeah. I think that's kind of what I'm seeing is we're trying to piece apart and make the most perfect motion, and it's taking way too much time to get to that perfect motion. I'd rather see a bunch of standalone ones. If I see a violation for this, I'll throw it out there and say, I'm seeing 67 whatever, and someone might see something else. Great, we can vote on that next.
So I just want to pick up on something that Chris, Member Highland, had mentioned, and that is if nobody has a motion, what happens? Well, we've been down that road. We had a very extensive number of meetings about how to deal with that, and we have to have a motion. So if there's going to be no violation found, then that's the motion, to find no violation and to close the file, and then allow the appeal process to work. We have the reconsideration process to work. So, if it comes to a point where, I count to 60 and there's no motion after I've entertained the introduction for one, then the next question is going to be, are we finding no violation? And
I think it's fair that, certainly if there's an extended period of time and no one feels comfortable putting forth a motion, I mean, I think, as chair and vice chair, whomever chair and vice chair are, could put forward that default motion just to formally close it. And then, if it gets voted down and people think they still want to discuss, then, at least there's some type of, mechanism to keep things moving.
So I would say by default, if after a certain period of time, if it's not clear that anyone can formulate a motion for a violation and or there's no immediate finding of no violation, then by default, I'll just put forward a motion to find no violation.
I would also note that the bylaws have a third motion that we can have, and that's just to close the file. And so that could be the default motion that we have.
But that I believe is to find no violation.
Well, there's actually noted in the bylaws. There's find a violation, not find a violation, and then close the file. Almost taking a neutral stance. If you look at the bylaws. So maybe that's the one that we consider doing in those circumstances.
Okay. I see member Neighbors and then Mr. Pilpel.
I think it probably is worth exploring to why there's no motion or why people aren't making motions. I know Matt has been coaching me, Vice Chair Yankee has been coaching me because of my hesitancy to make motions or my intimidation. I'll make a motion and then feel like, oh, the motion I made wasn't good enough and all these things happen to it down the pipeline or whatever. And just getting a sense of how to make a better motion in terms of how this body operates. What is a good motion in this body? And looking at more examples has really been helpful for me. And also a lot of help from Chair LaHood and, helping me like, do you really want to make that motion? How about this? Getting a little bit of craft there. Not saying it's not good enough or it's not, but like, how can we sharpen it up has been really helpful. It may mean that we just need to talk a little bit more about that so that people feel more confident making motions. It might not be that people aren't ready. People don't have an idea of the outcome they want to see. They just are hesitating to make the motion for whatever reason, So there may be some discussion around that would be helpful as well.
Let me just pick up on that point. Would it be more helpful if there was more kind of discovery at the committee level? So there's more information coming to the task force from the committee. So that way there's not so much investigation being done at the task force meeting.
I mean, I found it really helpful when, I think especially when Member Highland doesn't, he actually often does a strong recommendation from their committee. I think we started working on that too in our committee. We recommend that the full task force find a violation of, and really go ahead and write out that recommended motion based on the depth that we've heard so far. And then anything, of course, could be probed, and of course you want to hear it fairly. But that also gives you a little bit of a blueprint or a map for moving forward. And I think for me as a new member, that's been helpful. But I don't want to speak for other people.
David Pilpel, can I jump in?
Sorry, I was on mute. I just called you. Go ahead.
Okay. I may be anticipating or channeling Member Highland here, but I think you're doing the thing that you complain that you don't want to do, and you're doing, which is sort of talking and processing this thing to death. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just on the question of making a motion or dismissing a matter. I would just suggest that either the chair or any of you can say, okay, we've heard a certain amount of stuff. We could do 1, 2, or 3. What do people think? And at some point, very quickly, if there's no motion, then the matter just dies, in the same way as if there's a motion to find a violation and you deadlock, if there were 8 members present, you deadlock 4-4, that's it. Then no action was taken. Next item. Thank you all very much for coming, and we're done on this matter. And, let flow from that. If someone wants to contest it with a request for reconsideration, or go run over to ethics, or whatever the heck they want to do. But in my view, there doesn't have to be a motion either to find a violation or to not find a violation. You can simply have heard the case and you just decided not to act on it. It was properly brought for a hearing and there was no motion. So people didn't feel inclined to find a violation or to make it go away. And that's it. Done. The 30 minutes, 45 minutes, we're done with this item. Next. That's the thought. There you go. Thanks.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. We have been very strongly urged by our administrators not to do that, that there has to be a motion. And as Vice Chair Yankee says, there is a provision in our bylaws under section 9(7)(c) that says make a motion to take no further action and close the file, which is essentially what you're saying.
You can certainly do that anyway, but I would respectfully disagree that you need a motion. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
940.
Member very good. Member Padmanabhan.
I'm just going to add that I actually do agree with what Vice Chair Yankee. The hesitancy lies primarily in my part, particularly in making or crafting that perfect motion, which includes everything that you can possibly include at that point. And that's where I think it gets complex. So I like the idea of crafting a motion and then kind of voting on it and then moving on. And if someone else wants to make another motion, go ahead. To me, that makes would speed things up quite a bit.
I would say I don't think any of you would be wrong in making a motion in any way, shape, or form. We're all here as a collective, as a brain trust, and we'll help each other formulate the perfect motion together. But getting something on the floor is important than hesitating or being apprehensive not to. And I think that it kind of hamstrings the process. And I think it doesn't help the parties feel confident that we see the way things, we see things the way they see things. And it makes us seem also apprehensive and maybe not understanding. I would hate for the public to think that. So I would say if you have any idea, get it on the floor. If people don't agree, we'll vote it down. That's okay. At least we have some movement. I think that's important. Okay. We are seriously running. Okay, we've got a bunch of. Okay, last thought. Go ahead, Member LaHood. Last thought, and then let's close this meeting. We've had some great discussion.
I don't need to give a last thought. Much has been said. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. What I'll do is I'm suggesting that we do another short meeting sometime in the near future. I'm not going to say maybe next month. But do look at that statement of incompatible activities. If you have questions about it, we have time in the February meeting, or if you want to contact me, or Victor is really good at it. I'm not sure, Cheryl, if you're familiar with the statement of incompatible activities part. It's or even our legal counsel or the clerk herself, somebody. There's lots of resources to get answers about that because the behested payments is now, as you saw, is now law, and that could affect both the incompatible activities and the way each of us operates out in the world. So I just want to put that in front of you too. And then we'll, I don't know, we can go over the respondent form and see how that process is going. Do you want to do that at the next meeting, or do you want to hold it over for another similar meeting like this, where we have a little free flow of discussion? Just speak up. Don't raise your hand. Just open your mic and speak up.
Chair Wolf, this is Victor.
Yeah.
I'd just like to let you know that the behested payment, Supervisor Peskin introduced an initiative ordinance for the June 7th election. And it should be available by Thursday afternoon.
Okay. And not the Ethics Commission?
No, this was
They had their own
introduced by
version.
Supervisor Peskin.
Okay. All righty.
Okay, I'll speak up on the other issue. I think let's put it on the February agenda. If we don't get to it, we can always continue it, but at least it's on the agenda. And so if we want to talk about it, it's there.
Okay.
Totally agree.
Okay, great.
February
All
task
right.
force agenda.
Yes.
Yes. All right. I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn. Short this agenda.
Don't be shy.
This is Member Lohan. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I will second that.
Moved by Member LaHood, second by Vice Chair Yankee. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned at 9:46. Almost 9:46. All right, thank you very much, folks. Good meeting. We'll see you next week.
Good night, everyone.
Have a good weekend.
See you next week. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.